Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Revere City Council Subcommittee on Public Works, and today is September 21st, 2015. And tonight we're going to visit the first viewing of a proposal from the Traffic Commission for our emergency snow removal restrictions and different potential city ordinance on snow and ice removal. I want everybody to realize that this is only a draft. The Traffic Commission has already met once to discuss it. They wanted us to look at the package and see if we had any issues. And hopefully the councilors that are present tonight, which I will introduce them now, from my left, Councilor Reardon from Ward 4. To my right, Councilor Guanasso from Ward 3. And to his right, Councilor Jessica Giannino, Councilor at Large. So we want to welcome the councilors, and I hope everybody got to look at something on this. I don't know if you've really seen it, but we did get it by email last month. And we were hoping that we'd get the Superintendent of Public Works, but I have not heard from him. So all I can do is read to you the letter that came from the mayor, and then we can kind of discuss it after that. And this is a letter to the Traffic Commission, and it states, as you are all aware, this past winter was difficult in terms of snow removal due to the record amount of snowfall and the inability of our city plows, as well as independent contractors, to navigate many areas due to the vehicles parked on the streets. We also had to close our public schools longer than we would have liked to due to the impassable sidewalks. That said, we have made proposal changes to our city ordinances regarding snow and ice removal and to Schedule XX of Title 10 for tow-away zones. We propose one-sided parking from the period of December 15th through March 15th on all streets that currently allow parking on both sides. We would propose odd-side parking only for the season 2015 to 2016, and would revisit switching the even-side parking only in alternate years. Copies of the proposed changes are attached for review, and please make arrangements as soon as possible to schedule a meeting of the Traffic Commission to review the proposal, and it can be brought before the City Council as soon as possible. One of the draft ordinances was about snow and ice removal from sidewalks and footways. And there were some issues on that. There was another ordinance about snow and ice removal from sloping roofs, realizing that a lot of people had to remove snow because it was falling onto sidewalks and other areas that may be dangerous. I did bring up to the Traffic Commission when we met last month that some of these have to be definitely reviewed as far as the snow and ice removal from sidewalks and footways. I told them I believe I remember a Supreme Judicial Court ruling that cities and towns cannot make residents do their sidewalks and fine them if they don't. So that is being reviewed. The sloping sidewalks, sloping roofs was still open to be reviewed. And then there was a change for obstructions of public ways. And that included, believe it or not, snow removal contractors piling snow on at the corners of sidewalks and people's properties onto city streets, which was known anyways, but now there would be a city ordinance if this was passed. Attached to the packet was a list of proposed snow emergency parking ban streets. Some of them are already in place, but they included many additional ones all over the city. Another ordinance was about the Schedule 10 that I mentioned about tow-away zones, and we would like make sure that all the councilors review this and bring their recommendations or their thoughts to members of the Traffic Commission. So I know the package was like 89 pages long, so I'm not going to read them all, of course. But I think maybe Councilor Janino, you want to comment on this?
Sure. So I think we all knew that we had one of the toughest winters that we've had in recent years. So I'm really glad that we came forward to start working on this. My dad is a member of the traffic committee, so I know he worked really hard on this, as well as the police chief and the fire chief and the director of the DPW. And I think that it's a great start, and it's something that we definitely need. And I think it just makes a lot of things clear, so you know if you're on a certain street, this is the guideline. And I think the most important thing about this, once we do finalize it, is getting it out to our residents so they have an idea of what's going to be going on, and maybe coming out with a mailer or a brochure or something so that everybody has the information at their disposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Guanasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly appreciate the work effort that was put forward by the Traffic Commission, along with the administration and anybody else who had input into coming up with a remedy to alleviate a very, very serious problem. We received over 101 inches of snow this past year, and in 11 weekends in a row of getting hit with serious amounts of snow to really do damage to not only the properties that exist within the community, but also to the business community that experienced such a terrible loss of revenue over this past winter. But I think what we're doing, I think at least we're addressing some of it. It's so big in magnitude that you can't address this one particular issue in terms of one meeting or get together and come up with one. We almost have to go piecemeal. And as we proceed, we go forward with a different direction as to how to make it the most comfortable way of our residents to be safe. And certainly provide the services that the city is required to do in terms of snow plowing with outside contractors and employees within the DPW, that we just have to have our game plan in place. The only thing is not probably in this, and I didn't see it in the review, is that when the DPW hires these outside contractors, that they be made aware of certain streets that require certain sensitivity, things such as hydrants, and certain areas that where we know that there's a heavy amount of senior citizens located in senior buildings within the community, that they pay a little attention to that and do a little bit more effort into cleaning that area as they normally wouldn't do if you're just making the pass down the street. And again, in addition to the outside contractors being hired, that the DPW knows these small and restricted streets that you can put the smaller plows on. But certainly the bigger streets and the hills require the bigger equipment that we have to fight this snow problem. So I think our game plan in place to meet with the outside contractors, say in the next month or so, to get them ready and get them know what we're looking for as a community. I think that will be most beneficial to the snow removal process for this coming year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. I just got a text from from Superintendent Goodwin. I don't know the details, but he said he had a death in the family and he would not be able to attend. So don't know any details on it, so okay. Just so you know.
Thank you.
Let's jump to Councilor Reardon first, and then we'll hit Councilor Patch. We thank you for coming, and Councilor Haas for coming. Councilor Reardon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say as I said at the Traffic Commission meeting, that this is really new ground we're dealing with here. We don't have a lot of experience, obviously, except the bad experience we had last winter. So by the same token, remediating those issues are going to be a new experience as well. So while I was generally pleased with our efforts, particularly those to see that we have less parking during snow emergencies, including not just on our main thoroughfares, but on our side streets. It seems to me that the information by way of the tables that were given are kind of hard to read. For instance, and I'll say apparently the schedule would revise Schedule XX of Title 10, tow-away zones. And then it goes on to describe some changes, which may or may not be necessary. But the problem is, for the average person out there, in fact, even for the city councilor, I'm not exactly sure what these changes mean. So it would be, I think, prudent for the Traffic Commission to be a little more explicit as to what the change actually means, when it would become effective, rather than refer people back to the actual title, which of course you would have to do in order to understand it, the schedule in the title, I should say. So I would ask that, these tables could be a little bit more explicit as to the individual streets in towns, streets in the towns, in the town rather, so that the people who live on them will understand what they're up against. I'll just use as an example. The change to Fenno Street appears to be the entire length is now going to be a tow-away zone during certain snow emergencies, apparently, although it's not specifically stated on this, but it should be stated on that, and it's changed from what was apparently the prior situation from Broadway to Dale. Well, that's the entire length of Fenno Street already. So I'm not exactly certain what that exactly means, and I don't think I'd be the only one to suggest that. So I think we need to be a little more specific. I understand that we're dealing with a new territory here, and it's not going to be easy, and it's probably going to be, a lot of it's going to probably be done on the fly. So we have to work with it. We have to expect to work with it. But I think it's very, very important that our citizens know what to expect by, say, the beginning of December. What can they expect if they get a snowfall that's going to invoke a snow emergency? And they ought to be able to be told how much snow is likely to invoke a snow emergency, which is another issue, because really, when you're sitting at your job and you have to figure out, where am I going to park when I come home tonight? Is there going to be a snow emergency? You have to be able to look at the weather and say, well, they're only predicting 4 inches, so there will not likely be a snow emergency. And I know that it can't be predicted like that. They could say 4 when they mean 10. Who knows? But at the same time, as much predictability in this as we can afford our public, it would be helpful, because, I mean, you own an automobile, you got to park it somewhere. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome, Councilor. Councilor Patrick, nothing. Councilor Haas, you have anything to say on snow emergency?
Nothing. I think Arthur basically hit it. They have the wrong machinery in the wrong areas. I know that on Charlie's area, they have the big, heavy-duty trucks. In Finley Street and the other areas, they use the small trucks, and they don't have the capabilities of really moving it. And I mentioned this to Don, and he says, we'll improve that as time goes on. But again, last year was a good example. You know, Ward 6 was done perfectly, and you go up to the hills, and they didn't have the machinery to push it back. And these companies were just going down the middle of the street. And I addressed that with Donnie, and I think he will make improvements for this year, without question.
Thank you. Well, I did go to the meeting, and a lot of the comments that were made by you folks tonight were mentioned that night at the Traffic Commission, especially the Councilor Reardon's comments about how much snow would be considered a snow emergency and to ban parking. They were talking anywhere from 2 inches up to 6 inches and above. But again, it's still up in the air, so I don't want anybody to think that that's going to be the solid number. It's still something that the commission has to talk about. The Superintendent of Public Works and the Fire Chief have the main say in these things, looking at fire equipment and also the size of equipment that would be plowing the streets and what would have to be done, whether it was an ice storm or whether it was a 4-inch storm, and the amount of equipment and the type of equipment that they would have to call in. Now, that night, there were some people from some residents that came up to discuss this, and one person mentioned about with the 8 feet of snow before it got to the over 100, mentioned that some of the front loaders that came down and did the streets that had one-sided parking couldn't make the snow push all the way down and piled snow on the sidewalk and it handicapped parking spaces, which totally messed up, the people's minds trying to get their cars out from those HP spaces, or trying to even get them back in the spaces after they plowed the street. Another issue was the size of the vehicles not pushing the snow all the way back to the granite curb, which I specifically mentioned and other people mentioned too. So it is a training issue, as Councilor Haas said, to the contractors to make sure that it's not only going down the middle of the street, it's all coming down the middle of the street, then moving another 3 feet, 4 feet, pushing it back a little further, then coming down again 3, 4 feet again, and moving it back to the curb. Now, we all have been involved with snow removal for many moons, even before. Is that right? Is he a good guy? Can I hire him? But, so we have to realize that the contractors have to learn, and believe it or not, even our own employees driving our snow plows and the big articulators have to understand that it's not only keeping the street open for fire department. Now, another issue is that the streets that, and I believe this is the way it was, the streets that are already designated emergency bans are going to stay that way. But all the other streets that have two-sided parking would be the ones that were alternated from December through March. Now, realize it would be odd even. We start this year in 2015. It would overlap into 2016 season, the snow season, correct. So the following year, we'd go to 2016, it would be the even-side park, that would be this no parking. So, and this would be the same thing for the season itself. Now, if everybody remembers, about 5 years ago, I had the honor to introduce a motion that the MBTA open up their garage down at the Wonderland parking space. And it took 2 years before the T understood what we were trying to do, until we got one big snowstorm. And we have to thank Speaker of the House, DeLeo, for making a move and contacting the MBTA and MassDOT to get that parking lot open for $5 for a 24-hour period. Now, a lot of people took advantage of it. Not super low, but a lot did. And I think it's just important that people understand that that's the place to go. Get your cars off the street. If you don't want to have to shovel, get your cars off the street and use the Wonderland garage. And before I give it to Councilor Morabito, and I thank you for coming, is Councilor Reardon on this tollway zones. These corrections that are in red on their chart that you saw, a lot of those say entire length, but Sergeant Janino was trying to be specific what the entire length was, from the beginning, say Broadway, up to Dale Street, and then it included the dead end on Dale Street going up past, what's that other street where the Prospect House is? Yeah. Spring Ave, yes. Okay. Right. So, they're looking at this stuff, and again, these are corrections that we want to hear from you. If you can make notes on some of these forms and get them over to Sergeant Janino over in traffic. and he will understand what you're looking for and what your thoughts are on it. And I say the same thing to the other councilors again, okay? Council Moravito, comments on the snow removal?
Hopefully, we won't have another winter like last year, but if we do, obviously, we want to be prepared and have a comprehensive plan and that's effective for snow removal. So it's, I guess, future conversation will be in the works.
Yes, there will be. Councilor Patch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to comment on what Councilor Haas said about my ward. We don't have heavy-duty equipment on the streets. We have, I know my streets, and we have dump trucks. But it's not the size of the truck, it's the operator of the vehicle that counts. And I'm very blessed to have two companies that do my neighborhood, that Vester Construction and Mercurial Brothers, that they do an excellent job. I mean, they've been doing it for 40 years, and but they're dump trucks with a plow. That's all they are. And I do want to comment that Finley Street is also Ward 6. So I have complaints from other areas, and you know, Ward 6, for as bad as the year was, I mean, we had a lot of complaints. I mean, it was just too much snow for the duration of time that we got, and the freezing weather didn't help at all. So they did do a fine, you know, they did, for what the conditions were, I think they did a good job. It's just that, and hopefully we'll never see that amount of snow again. And that's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. I do want to mention that one thing that I know every ward councilor has this issue is dead-end streets. And some of the snow plows and the contractors have a habit of not doing the dead-end portion of a street until after the snow is over. Well, I personally have had issues with this up on the hill streets of Shirley Ave. And I tell them, fire apparatus and emergency vehicles still have to get up there whether, there's snowing or not, and the streets should be open. And the dead ends should be made sure that they don't pile in the homes at the end of that dead-end street, let alone on the middle of a street like they were in the big storm. But I'm sure that by the end of November, we will have before the end of November, there'll be several public hearings through the Traffic Commission to discuss this. And again, I implore all the ward councilors and any councilor at large that they have issues on this, if they have the issues on this, to please make notes and get them over to Sergeant Janino. And if you want to forward it to the Traffic Commission members, the two chiefs, Superintendent of Public Works, the city planner, and the city engineer. Those are the members of the Traffic Commission. But we are looking to try and make things better and easier for everybody. Now, I know not everybody has parking spaces, but as I state in all my emails that I send out to all my residents of Ward 2, to share your parking spaces with your neighbors. That's what it's all about. Be neighborly, work together. So I know, I don't realize, know how many cars were towed this year, but some of the issues that we ran into were not acceptable. But we would hope that a standard amount of money is applied to all the tows, not like what happened in my neighborhood, where some people were doubled and tripled by the company on how much it would cost them, which was definitely totally unacceptable. And that is being brought forward to the Superintendent of Public Works and also the police chief, because he is the one that controls the towing fees. So if any other last-minute comments before we can pack this in? No? So with that, I thank everybody for coming. I know there's a lot to talk about in the next couple months, and we hope, again, for some people, we hope there's an easier winter. For the other folks that have snow plows and are in the business of snow plowing, I hope it's not as bad, and that we all make it through the next winter safe and sound and healthy. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending, and we will see you the next time we call a meeting at the Call It a Chair. Thank you.